To agree that the face of diplomacy is changing. And Kenya last year launched a review of her foreign policy. Let's take a look at what it was before. Now, this is according to sessional paper number 1 on Kenya's foreign policy of 2025. In order to strategically position itself, was a position prior in the international arena, Kenya charted a pragmatic approach underlined by non-alignment, Pan-Africanism, non-interference and good neighborliness and pursuit of its national interests. Now, the situation currently, I'm just going to read an excerpt from that sessional paper, but it's a 101-page document. But this interested me. Kenya's foreign policy aims to enhance the country's standing as a regional leader and effective advocate for Africa's interests on the global stage. Now, speaking of the geopolitical shifts, this is the political context that was given by the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary and the Principal Cabinet Secretary, that is Musalia Mudavadi. The review of Kenya's foreign policy comes at a time when the world is experiencing a shift in global order as new alliances and rivalries emerge in the context of a dynamic international landscape characterized by the decline of multilateralism and the emergence of a multipolar world. There is an increasing need to review the policy. All right, I will start with you, Professor Macharia Munene. I read an article you penned on Kenya's loss at the African Union, and you put it down to 3 factors. But in general, before we get into the nitty-gritty, do you believe that there has been a shift under President William Ruto where Kenya's foreign policy is concerned?
Yes, there has been a shift, mainly because it is the president who makes foreign policy. All the others are supportive battalions in the whole things. And President Ruto has gone out of his way to be seen to be in charge and to decide what will happen. Sometimes he blunders in the process, but it is his foreign policy. And yes, he would like to be seen to lead other African countries in some particular issues. To that extent, there is that.
All right. So you say he would like to be seen to lead African countries in certain respects. His conversation with Emmanuel Macron that he reported on, where the DRC conflict is concerned, and with Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, drew some criticism, with some saying that, we are looking for African solutions to African problems.
Well, the Macron encounter was very unfortunate in the sense that he gave the impression that he consults a Frenchman first before talking to other Africans. It was not a very good picture. Whatever his intention was, it did not come out very well. The discussions with Marco Rubio, I don't think they have come out as badly as the one with the Frenchman. And I understand he has had 3 discussions with Marco Rubio since Marco Rubio came to office, which is reported more than any other African leader has had. And the consultations have been mainly the U.S. wanting to know what's going on in Africa.
All right, so I'll ask you to put a pin in that because I want to come back with a question. But also, in recent days, there has been a conversation around Kenya hosting the Rapid Support Forces and other players from Sudan. Dr. Ojwang, in your view, did it indicate a shift from a policy of non-interference and non-alignment?
Probably not, and the reason being that, one, I'm having problem with the idea of crossroad. I don't want to problematize your title too much, but I'm wondering why you think the Kenya foreign policy is at a crossroad, because that sounds akin to tossing a coin and not very decisive, yet on the other side you are talking of the foreign policy clearly launched and marking 9 themes. But that is neither here or there. I think that Kenya is usually multi-aligned. Multi-aligned means if we need to work with India, we work with India. If we need to work with China, we work with China. If we need to work with the US, we work with the US. It's based on what is needed or what is available. Now, so the idea of Pan-Africanism, the idea of an aligned, Kenya have been generally practicing what is called strategic neutrality, meaning we are neutral. But being neutral does not mean you cannot choose a side when clearly there is a moral reason or a better interest also. Because remember, foreign policy is being administered, as Professor Macharia will tell us, for the sake and for the interest of the country. It's not being done in void. And therefore, sometimes it becomes hard when we have binary or a little bit of, you know, who are the good guys or the bad guys. It's more nuanced than that, in the sense that Kenya is practicing strategic neutrality. And because of that, you know what Kenya have done in the region. I also agree that to some extent, a Kenya policy within the continent is a little more aggressive than within the international. And that is not a new shift. Professor Macharia will tell you that is how Kenya have always operated. They have been doing a little bit of heavy lifting, almost as an anchor state, or a stabilizing state within the region. And with that, they have ended up making decisions or finding allies. Because of that, Kenya does very good in multinational and not so good in regional competitions or regional diplomacy.
All right, let me, because you mentioned Professor Macharia Munene, so let me get his take on that as well. There's something that Dr. Ojwang has talked about, aggressiveness, right? And he says it works well on the multinational stage, not so much continentally. Is that one of the factors you listed as costing Kenya the AUC chairmanship?
No. The loss in Addis Ababa, the three factors that I said. To start with, each of the voters, that's the president, had to look after their interests. Three types of interests: personal, national, and continental. And having that, then turning attention to the candidates to decide now the three factors that would influence how the voter will consider his or her interest to be taken care of. First was the president. What do they think, or how much trust do they have on President William Ruto? And if they have problems with William Ruto, then it's very difficult for them to vote for his candidate. And the mistake that President Ruto made in the last minute was the Macron mistake. Yeah? That was a blunder. Whatever way one looks at it, it was a blunder. The second is Kenya as a country. What do they think or take Kenya to be? Is it a country that is safe? Is it a country that you can really expect to look after the interest of the continent? Eh? And we have had our ups and downs on this matter. And in recent times, it has not been very good. The image has not been very good with these abductions, that foreigners do not feel safe in the country. And not just foreigners, but even citizens with these abductions. So the image was tattered. And because it was tattered, and you have all these leaders looking on and wondering, do you really want to trust your fate on that country? Then you have the third factor that I pointed out, and that's the person of Raila Odinga. He's a well-known figure with a rich history, some of it not very nice, and they know it. Now, overall, it appeared at least 15 countries were for Raila. That one is very clear. They believed he was a good man, a reformer, progressive, whatever, the sort of person that you need. And so they were there, 15 of them. Then there are those who have a lot of questions about Raila. The questions are that he is known as a coup maker, the 1982 coup. They know it. They know him as a person who makes the country ungovernable whenever he loses an election. And that's a factor. Eh? And sometimes they see him as a link with extracontinental forces. Eh? Mm-hmm. Because there have been a few instances when the outside countries say that he is the leader of the Africans. Eh? Like when it happened in Ivory Coast, and he was sent there as the man. So the combination of those three, each of the voters wonders, can you trust Ruto, Kenya, and Raila? Mm-hmm. If the answer is yes, and it is in their interest, then they vote for him.
All right.
If the answer is no, or they have serious doubts, then they vote against it. So I think that's what happened in the voting. Many of those had doubts about Kenya.
All right. I just beg your indulgence to give us your closing remarks. So, Dr. Ojwang, Kenya's foreign policy has taken a beating on several fronts. The AUC chairmanship election, RSF signing their charter in Kenya with several other players. You have the DRC conflict. It's taken a beating. Does it remain on course? Do you think it's headed in the right direction?
Absolutely, and the reason is I think you don't have much time, but let me give you some sound bites very fast. One, we know that even Amina could not make it as the AUC chair. We also know that the record of Djibouti is not more glorious in terms of human rights compared to Kenya, even with the issues that Kenya face. So it is. It is not true that Kenya lost because of its human rights record. Quite contrary. We also know that Raila ran on a reform platform, and that can also be dangerous and scary because one of the institutions that really need reform clearly is AU. So of course that election is complex. There is a lot of interest. We are talking to Macron, yet we also say that election was determined with who colonized who, including the weakness of IGAD, that IGAD could not come with one candidate. And we saw SADC and whatever coming with a common position. But I don't think there's a decline. One, because in 2022, Kenya beat Djibouti in becoming UN Security Council representative in Africa by a big margin. And that shows you that when it comes to international, Kenya is doing much better. Don't use the old tools to measure the current diplomacy or foreign advances. For example, we now have digital diplomacy. That is, Nairobi is the hub. We have almost every international organization seeking for the region an office in Nairobi. We have athletic diplomacy. We have cultural diplomacy.
And those are...
You know that Kenya is in this region in Haiti. So I don't think there's any decline, and probably what we need to understand is that the things are more complex than simply who are the good guy and bad guys. But I could comment on RSF in a second.
In a second.
Yes, very important, because Kenya, what is going on in Sudan after al-Bashir, remember the two forces arrested al-Bashir, the civilian government. But now, if you look at that agreement, it is who and who in Sudan. And they are saying that we want an Islamic state. We want a secular state. The other side wants Islamic state, backed by a few countries there. The people who signed in Nairobi, it's actually it's about 18 members. Don't just focus on the RSF leader. It's 18 members, about 7 parties, civil society, and people of African descent that are saying we don't want Sudan formed in terms of, I forward you the agreement.
Yes,
we
you
don't
did.
want another country formed in terms of Islamist state again. We want a state that is secular and democratic. If not, then we want Sudan separated or divided for self-determination. So Kenya is
it's been a second. It's been a second, Dr. Ojwang. Unfortunately, I do have some time constraints, but I get your point that the Sudan issue is a bit more complex than perhaps we have framed it. Professor, your last take, does Kenya need to recalibrate the direction it's headed in where its foreign policy is concerned?
Yes, it does need some serious rethink. President Ruto and Musalia Mudavadi need to, and the other advisors, that they have been blundering. So ask themselves, what has been going wrong? Because clearly the event in Nairobi, no matter how much you pepper it, did not look good, because it gave the impression that Kenya is encouraging subversion in neighboring countries, or whatever the thing is. It did not come out very well. And that's not the first one. Remember, there was a time when we were accused of harboring, M23 in the Congo?
Yes, the Congo River Alliance that was signed here?
Yeah, it wasn't here. So the impression that rebels, wherever they are, even in Africa, you can go to Nairobi and do it. And, of course, to the other countries, to say, what's going on? They become jittery about it. So there may be need to rethink the approach that is taken by...
But you know, on one side we defend freedoms, on the other side we say... anyway, so this is a conversation definitely that requires a lot more time. We'll continue the conversation. Yes. All right. So we will continue the conversation another day. But I want to thank Professor Macharia Munene, historian, as well as Dr. Duncan Ojwang, who's joined us from Kisii. We'll take a break, but Citizen Weekend continues on the other side.